Hello, and welcome to our session this evening where we are discussing the essentials of getting outside safely, sustainably, and enjoyably this summer during the coronavirus pandemic. I'm Dana Watts. I'm the Executive Director here at Leave No Trace Center for Outdoor Ethics, and I will be your host for tonight's program. I just wanted to start by saying how inspired I am that we have hundreds of participants signed up for this webinar this evening. And it's a real testament, I believe, to our desire to get outside, our love of the outdoors, and our instinct to care for it, and our need for information, especially in these very challenging times. So thank you so much for joining us this evening. As you all know, Leave No Trace is an international organization. We really are focused on science, education, stewardship to ensure a sustainable future for our planet and the outdoors that we all enjoy in the United States and beyond. We have a great group of panelists tonight, informed individuals who all have a unique and special connection to the outdoors. We're discussing not only what's happening out there on public lands, but the latest COVID-19 research about how people are recreating, as well as trends, important skills that you can take home and apply, actionable advice, recommendations, everything you need to know to get outside today as our country continues to open up outdoor spaces. We want to understand how to not only protect ourselves, but also protect the outside for the future. One important note on the word safety that I just mentioned: nobody at the center or any of our panelists are medical professionals or disease specialists. We're following the guidance that, that everyone is hearing from the Centers for Disease Control, but the body, as everyone knows, body of medical knowledge of COVID-19 is constantly evolving and changing. We also note that we intend to give you helpful information. There are experiences and outdoor participants that are not represented on tonight's webinar. A couple more things before we get started. This is an hour-long webinar. I am going to be very mindful of keeping it right at an hour. We would like to take participants' questions towards the end of the webinar. If you do have a question, please type it into the chat box, and we will take as many as we can as time allows. And one more note, I want to thank a longstanding partner of Leave No Trace. Klean Kanteen is a huge help for putting this webinar together tonight. We are going to have a couple of questions for our audience, and I'm going to start off with one right now that you will actually be asked to participate in. On your screen, you're seeing a quick, easy question. How many times have you been out in the last week? And if you could please vote, or not really vote, but participate, that would be helpful, and we will tally the results, and that will kick off our session. And it looks like excellent, excellent. We're looking at the latest results, and I believe everyone can see how these in real time are coming in. And it looks like most people are getting out at least 2 to 3 times right now, 2 to 3 times a week. So thanks for participating in that. We will have 1 or 2 other polling questions just to inquire about you and you getting outside today during COVID-19 and this pandemic. Let me go ahead and start introducing our guests tonight. I'm going to start with Dr. Peter Newman. He is professor and head of the Department of Recreation, Park and Tourism Management at Penn State University. Peter studies visitor management in parks and related areas and has also served on the Leave No Trace board. At Penn State, he also co-leads the Protected Areas Research Collaborative, which focuses on forming visitor management at protected areas. Peter, welcome. My second guest is Lisa Jung. She is an author and a writer who focuses on outdoor sports. Lisa regularly contributes to magazines and other publications such as Outsider, Backpacker, Men's Journal. She's the author of 2 books about running: Trailhead, The Dirt on All Things Trail Running, and Running That Doesn't Suck. I need that, Lisa.
Yeah.
Next, I have Roger Semler. Roger is with the National Park Service. He is the Chief of Wilderness Stewardship. Roger's standing member of the Park Service's National Wilderness Leadership Council and the Interagency Wilderness Steering Committee. He serves as the coordinator for the Park Service for the Leave No Trace program, and he's also been involved with the Leave No Trace program since its inception. Next, Shannon Davis is the editorial director at Backpacker Magazine, where he began his career 15 years ago. Shannon has a long career working in writing about the outdoors. He's been a guide at Mount Rainier. He's developed strategy for REI and also served as editor-in-chief of Climbing Magazine. Shannon, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
And finally, we have Erin Collier. Erin is a Leave No Trace field educator. She has been on the Leave No Trace staff working in the field for, this is her third year. Erin has worked both for the BLM, Bureau of Land Management, and the U.S. Forest Service. It's, again, her third year with Leave No Trace, traveling the country, teaching people of all different backgrounds and abilities and demographics all about Leave No Trace. So welcome to all of the panelists. Let's see, this poll I'm going to get rid of. I don't know if everyone can all see it. Okay, there we go. All right, I'm going to assume everybody can hear me okay. Just give me the thumbs up, all panelists. Excellent, Roger? Perfect, perfect. Okay, we're going to start off with Peter Newman. Peter, as we all know, in mid-March, we were hearing more and learning more about what at the time was maybe a serious flu, then turned into a bit of an epidemic, and then was formally called a pandemic. And things started closing, offices, schools, businesses, and people were then told to stay at home. And it was a bit of a lockdown situation, pretty serious, and I would say pretty dramatic for most people in our country and really, frankly, across the world. So we've been living in that state now for a few months, but now things are slowly changing and evolving and opening up. But back at that time in the early stages, Leave No Trace and Penn State launched kind of an in-the-moment research project to really understand the effects of this pandemic. Can you speak a little bit to that research and kind of the model that was used?
Yeah, sure. So our research team was led by Dr. Derek Taff, and Derek and our PhD student, Will Rice, along with our other team members, Tim Attier, Nathan Rigner. We really worked closely with Ben Lawhon, who's education director at the center. And we conducted a three-phase study, and it was to do just what you were saying. We were really trying to get a better understanding of this idea of outdoor enthusiasts. And I think what I would say, and maybe correct you a little bit, this was not a sample of the general public, but really a sample of these outdoor enthusiasts. But a good sample. We collected about 2,700 surveys. And this is basically the Leave No Trace online community. These are outdoor enthusiasts. These are folks who, very much like the group that answered these questions, are recreating outdoors 4 to 5 times a week. These are folks who are chomping at the bit to get back to the parks, and which is also why we thought it was important to get a sense of who are these first folks back to the public lands when they opened. At the time, a lot of the public lands were closed, and what we found was, a few things. One, it was really amazing, and I bet participants in this webinar saw this, that people found other ways to get outdoors and recreate. They were using local parks, they were using their neighborhoods, they were really getting outside and trying to really make the best of that situation. They also said that they wanted to get back to it as quickly as possible, which was something that they said, as soon as it opens, we're not going to wait. We're gonna get back to it. And these are the people that really jammed the parks those opening days that we saw, both in parks and Forest Service lands. And a few other things, we found that outdoor enthusiasts, they really expected and supported the fact that parks would provide guidelines, and they would accept this idea of social distancing. They would accept capacities, and there was this idea that they would choose some of these restrictions in order to potentially limit exposure where they can while still enjoying these spaces. And these same enthusiasts said that while they wanted to go to all these places, they were not supportive of opening up their own communities, which I think is interesting, an interesting piece in there. And to me, I think a lot of this gets back to really the principle number one: plan ahead and prepare. You know, it's like no matter where you go, you are going to be up against different kinds of restrictions in places. You may or may not have facilities that are fully open. And so, for example, people should be prepared with things like sanitizer, toilet paper, anything you need for personal hygiene, masks, of course. Two is to be patient, right? And then three, I think virtually visiting sites is really important. You know, getting online, Leave No Trace has an amazing set of tools to really check out some of these locations and what you might do in those spaces. And of course, I'm sure Roger will speak to the same thing about visiting the parks as well.
Excellent, excellent. Shannon, you've been a backpacker for a long time, and you know better than anyone that the outdoors provides different things for different people: adventure, solitude, community. This is a different time that we're really experiencing now. What are you seeing and hearing from backpacker readers about how they're getting outside, how they're getting connected back to the land after now the parks are opening and open lands are becoming more available?
Well, we definitely are seeing a lot of kind of pent up desire to get outside, and like it would almost mirror what Peter said, of people who want to get out as soon as the places open and are available. And we're seeing a lot more day hiking, a lot more local hiking, and maybe even a stretched definition of what hiking what we might normally call hiking, like maybe a local bike park or a few laps around your block can also check that box for people. We're also seeing a lot of people who may not have a comfort level with that, or where they live, there's still restrictions on travel or access, finding ways to bring the outdoors in,
Yeah.
You know, which is kind of an interesting concept and, you know, really fun if you think about it. And, you know, along those lines, like the reasons people are getting outside, or what's really missing, one thing that surprised me, okay, so yes, we hike and backpack. One big goal is often solitude. And, you know, there's probably no better way to socially distance yourself than to hike into the middle of nowhere. But one element is that you're often doing that with some really good friends or people who will become really good friends. And so, you know, there's this element of interpersonal connection and community that I think our readership has missed quite a lot and desires. And not only in terms of like, I'm going to try to get outdoors next weekend, you know, with my family or just to see other people in the fresh air, but also, as Peter said, finding ways to do that virtually. And that's kind of one new element that we've discovered that we could provide is in virtual events, one of which was just a nightly campfire on Facebook Live, which turned into a really fun kind of project that we went through the majority of kind of the more nationwide stay-at-home orders, and then we ended up kind of culminating that with a kind of a festival that we called the Backpacker Camp-In that had yoga and fitness and art, some interviews with you know, long trail hikers, and a lot of music. And we kind of, that's an interesting element that kind of was probably missing in backpackers kind of editorial makeup, was the idea that it's not just about how to do it and where to go and what to pack, but it's also who you're going with, and really seeing that as we're all in solitude, you know, in our homes, that's also something that we can help provide. And that's been a lot of fun and actually really heartwarming. And I think that that's something that we'll continue to do. But I would say that is something that our audience and community has been missing. And I think that, you know, we'll continue along that lines. But I think in terms of actual boots on the ground type travel, we'll continue to see a lot of local and road trips, probably in lieu of airline travel. But I think there's a lot of pent up desire, you know, out there for sure.
Yeah, and it makes me think of, you know, who you're getting outside with today. And for me and all of us, when we really were on a stay-at-home order, it was your family. And so we've had a lot of family time, for the most part, really solid and positive. But I think there now is a desire to open that bubble up a little bit. But it makes me think of you, Lisa, who have, you know, two small kids and wanting to get outside. How are you seeing that these days, and what are your recommendations for getting outside with families and particularly children?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really important to get outside with your family. I think we all know that nature does wonders for us as adults, and it does even more for kids. And in this super stressful time, I think it's just very important for us to enable our kids to get outside. And I think families can be sort of daunted by not only where to go, but what's open, what's available, what's safe, even if it is available. But it's just important to do it. And finding those places means getting online and researching. And as soon as camping became open, I was like online in the middle of the night nabbing campgrounds because it's just important for us to get outside. And when we came back from our first camping trip, my youngest is 8 years old, and he was sort of snuggling into bed and said, the best thing about camping is that you forget about coronavirus. Yeah. And that like broke my heart and warmed it at the same time, you know? So I just think it's important to get out there and just connect with nature right now. Yeah. It's important for us just to get the kids off screens also and you know,
right.
be outside.
Yes, when there are so few options. Yeah, absolutely. Roger, I want to go down to you, and from the land management perspective. So national parks, every day I see a new national park opening, literally kind of opening its doors in a way. But yet there are restrictions. There are things that everybody needs to keep in mind really before you go. And this brings up our point of never has kind of know before you go or plan ahead and prepare been more important. What are you seeing, and how is the park responding now to this evolving pandemic, but this opening up of parks across the country?
Thank you. Well, first and foremost, we are seeing a high degree of eagerness to visit our national parks. Obviously, people had pent up desires to get out there and enjoy our national park wonders. One of the things the National Park Service did early on was to establish a initiative called Recreate Responsibly. And I'm going to refer to a couple of the tips that are embedded in our Recreate Responsibly program. They, by the way, are quite similar in many ways to the principles of Leave No Trace. But let me just touch on a few of those. Things like know before you go, which of course relates closely to plan ahead and prepare. Things like keep it close, which means consider going to park units that perhaps are fairly close to home, or maybe new smaller areas that are less popular or less well known. Another one is keep your distance, which obviously relates to our nationwide efforts for social distancing. And then know your limits. And by that we mean be really extra cautious with respect to the level of risk you may be taking, and extra considerate to the possibility that if you were to be somehow engaged in a search and rescue related or emergency medical related incident, that puts a lot of stress on our healthcare system and our first responders, and of course could expose them to health risks along the way. And then the last one I'll touch on is keep it with you, which is extremely similar to pack it in and pack it out. The idea there is let's not leave anything behind, and let's try to minimize the amount of refuse or other things that park personnel need to deal with or touch or handle as a result of our phased in visitor access that's ongoing right now. Lastly, I do want to mention that we also developed what's called a responsive and adaptive operations management plan. And that has to do with our internal operations. And it's quite detailed, and it's built around the 3 phases. and the CDC guidance related to the 3 phases. And it provides extensive guidance for how we're going to handle field operations and visitor use management in our national parks. And I see you have put up my little graphic here, and at the top you will see our service-wide COVID, public-facing COVID information website. And that, I believe, would be your go-to one-stop shopping for overarching information. And then if you want to hone in on a specific park unit, I would recommend you go to the website for that unit. And to ensure that you have the correct website, always look for the nps.gov in the website address.
Great, great. Thank you, Roger. You know, I would actually love to go to Erin now with some more maybe practical tips. So one of the things that we all know and now experience is some kind of face covering. So a mask that is really required wherever you go, including on the trails. And some of the trails that I do here in Boulder can tend to be pretty narrow. So it presents kind of an interesting challenge when you're passing people. And both people have masks on, but you're also at the same time supposed to be socially distancing. And you know, you're giving each other the eye, like, what are we doing here? What's your recommendation for that, that scenario, and maybe other things that you're experiencing when it comes to either social distancing or mask wearing, or maybe not mask wearing in many parts of the country?
Yeah, I think that's a very common question that a lot of people have, and a very common experience. And it's something that is it's very new. It's a strange situation for us all to be in. I think at any given time, but especially right now, one of the most kind of effective and the best ways to just put everyone at ease is to communicate. And you can't really like show a smile like you normally would because you're wearing a mask. So just kind of saying hello, maybe giving a friendly wave. And for trying to pass folks, really thinking about where you can do that in the least impactful way so you're not damaging vegetation, because this is probably going to be happening for quite a while. And if we're all passing people and going off the trail, going around, we're going to start to create a lot of new trails and widen a lot of areas and cause erosion and things like that. So just looking around you and seeing where a durable place to stand off the trail might be. So durable things are going to be rocks, bare ground, pine duff, anything that you're really not going to damage by just having to go step over there. Mm-hmm. And then you can kind of step out to the side of the trail, be that 6 feet away, and then have those folks pass you. Rather than, I've seen this quite a bit as I've been out on trails, having you kind of go off trail and then try to just hike around that person.
Right.
Because if we're just standing in one spot, we're not really going to do much damage. They can go by us, and we're not going to create a whole new area trying to go around. And it's, you know, you have to just be patient in this time and let people pass. I think another thing that we've seen a lot of is people with dogs, because obviously a lot of people love their dogs. We want our dogs to be outside with us as well, but we want to think about that kind of comfort with social distancing and apply that to our dogs too. So maybe just keeping your dog on a leash, even if it's not required in that area, but then you're going to be able to keep your dog kind of in your bubble rather than having them run and interrupt anybody else's bubble. And then, as always, picking up our dog waste. A lot of the local trails in all of our areas, I'm sure, are seeing just a really, really high amount of people using them. So those little impacts that we maybe might have let slip before, like leaving the dog waste and thinking you'll pick it up on the way back, we want to just be even more mindful of those, because there's so many of us in these areas. And also, as we kind of just heard, our national parks, our state parks, our local outdoor areas, they're all a little bit strapped for staff and resources right now. So we want to do the best we can to help them out.
Yeah, absolutely. And we are seeing more people on more local trails, and in many ways, it's really inspiring. I kind of tend to do the same trail that's a little bit close to my home pretty much every day. And not that I know everyone on the trail, but you see some of the same faces. And in the last couple of months, I am seeing many new faces, and we've had these discussions around wow, if there's a silver lining right now, it's that more people are getting outside and more people are being introduced to the outdoors and have an interest in the outdoors. And Lisa, this question is for you, because I know as an experienced outdoors woman, I think that's a word.
Sounds good, thanks.
How does someone with your background help a novice or a less experienced person feel welcomed into the outdoor community, on the trails, in a park, so on and so forth?
I think there are a few different ways to do that. I have chapters in my books about etiquette, and it talks about leave no trace and right of way and all this stuff, but really it comes down to being kind. It's like, it's that simple. It's be kind. What Aaron was saying, maybe it's not smiling through your mask, but people can still tell in your eyes if you're smiling or just saying hello, making other people feel welcome, whatever level they're at. And also, if someone is moving more slowly than you and you're running, you don't have to yell on your left and like blow by them, you know, and like, it's just using common sense and common courtesy to treat everybody like they belong there. And that's, I mean, that's touching on a whole other issue right now with people of color and feeling, I mean, there's just been some unspeakable things happening in the running community and just in the world in general. And I think I've been interviewing a lot of runners in that space lately for different articles. And I don't think there's an easy solution to it, but it is being kind and inclusive and everybody accepting everybody. And if you work for a brand or a magazine or in a position of using imagery or content just that's representative of all cultures, that will help everybody feel more welcome in these spaces. It seems to be a common theme right now with who I'm interviewing on this topic. And then just on a personal level, if we are experienced outdoors women or men or whatever, like you can invite somebody to go with you who maybe is intimidated by trails. And what that looks like for me in this pandemic is driving separately to a not very busy trail, and we're wearing our masks and we're running like apart from each other, but that person's maybe now feeling more comfortable doing things like that. And so it's sort of sharing it on a personal level and maybe through work, trying to like write stories about these things, and also just being kind when you're out there on the trails to everybody who's there, making people feel like they belong, whether they're just new to it or just have never experienced trails before. Because you're right, there's so many more people out right now, and it's really about sharing the trails more than ever right now. And also because it's just such a tense day-to-day life, like it goes a long way when you're out on a run and you're feeling like, oh, I just need this space to feel normal. If somebody's kind to you on a trail, it just makes your experience so much better than if someone's like aggressive in any way for any reason. It just is something we all need to be aware of, that any little smile of the eyes above your mask or just the courtesy of pulling up a mask just goes such a long way as far as how everybody is feeling, which totally ties into all of our just general well-being.
Absolutely, absolutely. I wonder if a lot of those people who haven't maybe even explored a national park, and Roger, I'm curious about this situation. I actually had a friend who drove to Rocky Mountain National Park, got there and realized didn't make a reservation. Dang. And so I know that Rocky Mountain National Park has a reservation system. Are there other parks that have that in place now? And do you think that is something that might be here to stay for a little bit?
A number of parks have implemented reservation systems, particularly for either automobile camping or in many cases backcountry or wilderness camping or camping permits. Some of those are administered through the recreation.gov program, which is provided through a contractor, but it's a nationwide and interagency provider for reservations for outdoor recreation opportunities. Other parks administer reservations and/or permit systems in-house with their own systems or programs. And several of those are now phasing into operation. I noticed just today, no, it was yesterday, Isle Royale National Park announced that they were going to start providing for some backcountry permits for visitors that make it to the island.
Yeah, okay. And I would imagine that because the future of this this pandemic situation is somewhat a moving target and just unknown, that might be here to stay for a bit.
Well, we've had, even prior to COVID, we've had an initiative to try to provide for more advanced reservation opportunities and reservation systems. So that has become very popular and something the Park Service is very interested in enhancing.
Shannon, I have a question for you in just in terms of future planning and even just trends. Do you see long-term shifts in recreation scene that backpacker covers right now, changes you think might stick around even as we continue to deal with the pandemic and beyond?
Yeah, I think probably two things immediately come to mind. And one is that local hiking and hikes near me has always been something that the backpacker really wants. And I think that will want that more than ever, as how to find hikes near them and how to find hikes that are not crowded and how to employ strategies in uncrowded trailheads. And a lot of that, you know, for some of our more experienced end of the readership are employing some of the tactics that they've kind of learned over time and that we've helped by, you know, with like traveling at off hours, traveling midweek, exploring lesser known trailheads and things like that. But I think that probably the bigger thing that we'll want to tackle and address is like the huge numbers of new hikers that we're seeing and people hiking with their families and things like that, and help that experience be a really good one, and a really positive one, so that you know, if it's not fun, they're probably not going to do it again. And if they don't do it again, then, you know, backpacker kind of hasn't done its job very well. You know, our goal is to inspire and enable people to get outside more, because we believe the world becomes a better place when you get outside. You know, all these like trickle down effects of better health and better friendships and a greater care for the environment, and you know, eventually where your food comes from and nutrition and all those different things, that has this huge trickle down effect. So, you know, if we're seeing bigger numbers of people get outdoors and we're not helping them have a good time, you know, then they're probably not going to do it again. And so that's something that we're definitely going to be continuing to think about. I see Peter.
Peter, I see you. Go ahead.
Shannon, I was just going to add, it's interesting what you were saying. Our data support really what you were saying, in that about 40% of our respondents basically said that there were shifts in their behavior. They were getting out more, and they are planning, 40% were highly likely to continue that behavior into the future. So we heard the same thing from our respondents, very similar to what you're saying, as well as that idea that they really saw the benefits that they were getting, their own health benefits from that change in behavior. So sorry to interrupt, but it's exactly some of the trends that we were seeing.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And sorry, Shannon, I didn't mean to cut you off. Did you have more to add to that? Okay. And one of the things that I feel is really an opportunity, and also can be very inspiring for both people who've been involved with the outdoor industry or going outside and conservation community, but then for those who are newer, there's such an opportunity to integrate Leave No Trace and this whole concept of caring and this ethic that really connects people to the land in a different way, and in a way that is longer term. And again, with people who might not be as experienced, but really interested. And like you're saying, Shannon, we want it to be a really positive experience that has many, many benefits above and beyond just outdoor experience. But we here at Leave No Trace, of course, feel like that is just a natural fit to have that first outdoor experience, and the integration of Leave No Trace as part of that to make it that much more meaningful. And for the long term, as we build this outdoor ethic that really goes beyond just the outdoors, and it becomes more of a holistic, this concept of backyard to backcountry, and taking it really beyond just outdoor spaces, but how people relate to the planet in general. So that might be off on a little tangent, but Peter, I do have another question for you, and that is around you. I know your team at Penn State and here at Leave No Trace as well have been working for or within the parks on zero landfill. And so I'm wondering if there are any specifics around waste. And again, it really does come back to that principle of being prepared before you go, but anything specific around waste for the parks that you would recommend?
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, these were different studies. I think one of the things that we learned in that study was it was more on the management side of things. We did work in Yosemite and Grand Teton that really began to look at how people were sorting some of their trash, and we looked at behaviors of people, looking at how they, what percentage of trash was recycled and put into that program. One of the things we learned, I think, for the Park Service was this idea that it was how they were messaging things. And so that was a study that was really focused on messaging. And I feel like, and this is something I think we can all do, but it's about making ideas really accessible and easy, right? And then also making the action pretty easy. So that was placement of cans around campsites and visitor centers. And then also making that message personal. People generally want to do the right thing, and I would say the vast majority of people that come to our parks are wanting to do the right thing. There is a small percentage that don't. And the hard part is that when you have 3 million people or 4 million people visiting a park, that small percentage equals a lot of people. And so, we're really needing to have extremely high standards when it comes to that kind of thing. And so it really comes down to making it personal, talking about the effectiveness of the action. And so how effective is that small action that you're taking in terms of the protection of land, the protection of others, protections of wildlife, and then, keeping it simple if you can.
Yeah, great. So I'd like to query our audience one more time and ask people who are listening to the webinar another question, and you will see it appear on your screen. The question is, do any of the following concern you about being outside this summer? So if people could just let us know how they feel, we will tally those results and talk a little bit about, again, going back to this idea that we aren't out of this pandemic. And even though we have this window of what seems like opportunity to get outdoors more, be more social, there's this, kind of still dark cloud, if you will, that is over us, not just in terms of not really knowing what the fall or what the future brings. And I think there are many people who are still, there's fear and concern about getting outside. Interesting looking at these results. It's a social distancing and a crowding issue, that those are the two that really come that rise to the top. And Roger, I guess I'd come back to you with that question. Do you have anything around visitation numbers for the parks right now? Are they increasing? Do we know that yet?
I do not have any quick access to specific numbers, but we are seeing large crowds, particularly on weekends or holidays. And as we do our phased reopening, we're definitely seeing fairly high visitation. I think it'll be a matter of time before we can have some really valid statistics on how that looks.
Yeah, okay. Erin, wondering if you can give us a little advice just on general trip planning. It's tricky when a lot of areas or states, state by state, some of the info, it's not necessarily consistent information. So what do you say to actually understanding a place where you're going and advice around that piece of trip planning?
Yeah, I think just for the foreseeable future, we all have to be prepared to do a whole lot of extra planning ahead and preparing, and really taking the time and being patient and sifting through a lot of information. For many areas, visitor centers, places that we would maybe normally go to get a lot of information, are still closed. So a really great way to actually kind of tap into what's going on is to call ranger stations, because a lot of them still have the ability to have phone calls even if they're not open. And you can actually talk to someone who works in that park. They can give you really up-to-date information, because the other piece of this is things are changing so quickly. From 1 week to the next week, something might have closed or reopened, or a part of it closed. So it's really important that you find out you have the most current information, and that you also just have backup plans. So assuming that things are going to be closed, things like restrooms, or even maybe the restaurant you might be planning to eat at, making sure you have extra food and kind of provisions with you so that you're not going to put yourself in an unsafe situation. And then taking the time, I think, as you were kind of talking about earlier, now is such a good time to learn some of those leave no trace skills that you maybe haven't learned in the past, or you could use a refresher on. We have a massive YouTube channel that has videos about how to do your dishes, how to go to the bathroom outside, all of these hard skills that are going to be really helpful if things are closed, or if you're maybe getting outside in a way that you're not as used to. If it's something a little bit newer for you, you can learn those skills and know that you're going to be safe, and you're also going to be protecting the environment while you're out there.
Yeah, yeah. And again, stressing that notion of trip planning and know before you go. Lisa, just looking back again, or getting back to families and camping, are there any specifics that you would recommend, or anything that you do differently now in terms of the pandemic being kind of at play when you go camping with kids?
Equipment-wise, well, we bought a portable toilet. We bought a compostable, an outdoor compostable toilet. So we're doing that, because I'm not super comfortable going in public restrooms still.
And a lot of times they're not open. They're not available right now.
Not open. So I prefer wherever we're going to be completely self-contained. That means we're bringing our own food. We're bringing our own water in case the water's not turned on. We have more outdoor toys now, to use at campgrounds. But then just generally it's just getting out and doing it, but like, I do prefer being self-contained and assuming things aren't open, assuming things aren't closed. And for me, it's even assuming things maybe aren't as clean and safe as I'd like them to be. So we are, and we're bringing hand sanitizer, and the great thing about camping in campgrounds, state parks, national parks, wherever, is that you are socially distanced from the next group. It's just by design. It's how it is. So you get there and you have your own space, and people don't walk into your campground. And so it's just a nice self-contained way to enjoy being outside with your family. And we always, have games and things to do with the kids. So, I guess our main, our main recent purchase is our portable toilet.
Well, hopefully it will last.
Yeah.
Shannon, back to this notion of more people getting out and many newer people getting outside, and backpackers' desire, and I think everyone's desire to really welcome that into different outdoor spaces. How do you strike that balance just with your readership in that content piece with new people who are less experienced, and then the readership, I would guess, from Backpacker, who is a very experienced group, and kind of striking that balance? I'm guessing the desire is the same, the end result, but how do you strike that balance in terms of content?
Well, for like the newer hiker, one thing that you were doing is kind of helping dial in expectations and how far you're going to hike. For one thing, let's not decide that, this 15-mile hike might be a great idea, but let's check out a 3-mile hike, see how that goes, and really dial in what style of hike you want to do, and pack, like Lisa was saying, pack elements that are going to make you self-contained and help you have a good time. And if you're going to stop by the side of the trail, maybe you're bringing a Trivial Pursuit game and have an extra level of fun that you might not normally think of, to make this a really good leisure experience and not like an athletic pursuit, like from the get-go. And, you know, so we have like a fair amount of content, both on our website currently and like in the works along those lines of really helping both new hikers and their families have a good time together, like I said, so they want to get outside again. And then on the more experienced end, like helping people kind of figure out what their plan and strategies should be for overnight camping or backpacking. You know, things like traveling as a family or home unit, traveling separately if you're not, if you happen to have people coming with you who aren't, and having conversations with them that, you know, might seem awkward but are really safe and appropriate to ask about where they've been traveling and have they been at, you know, big gatherings. Were they at the protests, you know, in Denver? Like, what have you been up to? How you been feeling? You know, and having those conversations with people that you might be going out with. And then also kind of continuing to travel and camp in that unit. And even if that means, like, if I'm hiking with three of my friends, maybe effectively we're each packing for a solo trip. We just happen to be doing that together.
Right.
You know, so I have my own cook kit, I have my own tent, I have everything, so we can kind of keep our distance from each other and kind of stay safe in that way. So really thinking through, kind of thinking backwards from kind of those use cases of new hiker, I want to go have fun and, you know, just get out of the house and have a good time with my family and kids, to like, I want to go backpacking this summer and there's no way I'm not doing it. How do I do it safely?
Yeah.
So kind of trying to fill both buckets.
Yeah, absolutely. We do have a number of questions from our audience, but I want to ask Roger one more just about the Park Service. And in these times of COVID, are you seeing, and I'm guessing it might be too soon to tell, but are there consequences right now that you are seeing and experiencing for wildlife in particular, or any other sustainability issues that the Park Service has identified because of COVID-19?
It's hard to say that there's anything specific related to COVID-19 yet. Now, we have had some reports. For instance, Yellowstone has already had some reports of some human-wildlife interactions that were dangerous at best. But those occur every year, unfortunately. But the good news is we do have a respect wildlife principle for Leave No Trace. As far as physical resource impacts to soil, vegetation, trees, you know, root exposure, soil compaction, all those impacts that we tend to monitor, particularly in our campsites, I think it's too early to tell. One area I am concerned about are at destinations where people tend to congregate, and perhaps in situations where the durable surfaces are limited, there's not enough durable surface to spread out. Same thing, of course, was already mentioned with respect to trail encounters or stepping off the trail. So that is something to watch, and I think we probably will see some physical resource impacts along those lines.
Great. I am going to take a few questions from the audience. We have about 10 minutes left or so, but I'm just going to read this, and I really, any number of people could comment, but the question is around group size, and it is, I lead group hikes. What are recommendations on group size, or should I just delay leading hikes right now? Any thoughts or comments for sounding like a guide, somewhat of a guide, maybe official or unofficial, wanting to know group size limits? And I know that obviously there are limits at any given time, but under these circumstances, are they stricter, or what might the guidance be?
I can go ahead and jump in.
Yeah, please, Erin.
Yeah, I think there are quite a few group size limitations in just various counties or cities or states, depending on what the kind of phase of reopening is. In my local area, there has been a pretty heavy kind of 10-person limit in really any public space. So I would say try to kind of key into your local area, wherever your, wherever your local area is, or if you're going to a maybe adjacent area for leading these things, try to kind of figure out what that guidance is, and then really think about kind of where all these folks are coming from. If you're bringing a group together, it might be better to delay it depending on what the local guidance is for kind of gathering groups from various locations or various kind of little social distancing bubbles. It might be better to delay it, but at least being aware of what your local kind of group size is.
Great, great. Peter, here's a specific question for you from the audience. Have Penn State researchers considered contrasting urban and rural reactions to getting outside during COVID?
Yeah, that's a great question, and we did. We looked at different reactions. You know, we had responses from 47 different states, and we were able to look at that. And you know, early on in our early surveys, we really found that, you know, as you might expect, that urban recreationists were impacted a whole lot more, and had a lot more trouble and were more reluctant to get out into spaces than rural or even suburban recreationists. So there was definitely an uneven balance, and I think that is an interesting discussion, especially in light of this idea of how do we think about, you know, both access to recreation for everyone in terms of this idea of inclusion, and really thinking about how do we get to, you know, everyone out there. And so there were absolutely more pressures on outdoor recreationists from urban areas, and that was very clear in the data.
Great.
That's
Shannon,
a really good question.
Yeah. What advice do you have for multi-day hikers during COVID?
Definitely plan and prepare and research where you intend to go and what's near you and what's available. Making sure, you know, whatever permit system is in place, that you're able to do that from home, and that you're kind of doing all the things you need to do to you know, be allowed to do that trip. But also, you know, one main thing, and this was on Roger's list, is thinking about kind of maybe dialing back a little bit what you might have done, so that you're not unintentionally taxing the search and rescue network or park staff, things like that. And so, you know, if that means lower mileage, like, then so be it, because you're still getting outside and you're still doing an overnight trip, right? And, you know, and some of the things that I talked about previously, like some little things like, sure, I might have a bag of gorp. I have one right here, but let's not all reach our hand in that thing. You know, let's pour from the bag or pack individually. And that's one thing that we're talking about quite a lot is if I'm backpacking with a group, that unless it's an organized trip and this is a guided experience and maybe they have their own protocol, but if I'm with a group of friends, you know, let's talk about packing as individual soloists with our own cook kits, with our own food, with our own tents, unless we're traveling with a family or home unit and have been living together for the, you know, cooped up for the past 3 or 4 months. That's a little bit different, right? But really thinking about those packing strategies and kind of maybe dialing back mileage, not venturing off trail, kind of keeping it a little bit more low key than you might like for the big adventure for your year.
Yeah, right. Roger, is the question is, what are the thoughts about dispersed car camping? And maybe that's not a specific question for you, and it could be more for Peter. Has there been any impacts or studies around that idea of more dispersed car camping? And feel free both to comment on that.
Well, in the National Park Service, we typically rely more on having designated campsites, at least in a front country or roaded areas. I'll tell you, and I think there's some exceptions to that, but I'll tell you the area that comes to mind are the vast BLM landscapes where you have wide open spaces with some four-wheel drive or even just two-track type roads that are legally accessible, and you might have untold camping opportunities on those lands. I think it's these wide open spaces are ideal for social distancing. In many cases, your family's the only ones within sight. So it's not a bad concept.
Peter, has that ever been talked about, discussed as more of a study?
We have not talked about that yet as a study, but we would. No, you know, I think Roger said that really well. I think that's exactly it. But we, you know, I think the big things that we are hearing from people is that and it really looks like from some of these questions that people want to know how to do this right, and they want to do it well, and they're very much concerned about. We had a few questions on this last survey about perceived risk, I thought, which were really interesting, and we generally found that people are as much concerned about their community than they are themselves. And so that they're very concerned about how their community is going to get through this. I think there's just a yearning for a lot of this information about how to do things right.
Yeah. So this is my last question, and it's for both Lisa and Aaron. And Lisa, why don't you go first? We've touched a little bit on this topic, but audience is very curious about the top best practices for camping and hiking for novices during COVID.
Top best practices. I mean, I think it's wearing a neck gaiter, whether that's a Buff brand neck gaiter or just some sort of mask that you can pull up when you're passing anyone, or not even when you're just passing, but when you're a fair distance from another trail user, because it is what we're supposed to be doing right now. And it also just shows respect to the other trail user. And I mean, that's obviously for novices and experienced trail users alike, but I think doing that, and it's, I guess, a tip with that is that it's not as bad as you think it's going to be. Being on a trail and being able to breathe and then pulling a breathable mask up over your nose is not as challenging as some new trail users might think it is. You can breathe through them for however long, and even running. I mean, runners have been wearing these things for, trail runners and adventure racers and all sorts have been wearing these things for years without a pandemic to protect themselves from cold and bugs and all sorts of things. So it's not as bad as you think, I guess, wearing a mask on a trail. But I guess beginner trail users, just not every trail is straight up a mountain or 100 miles long. I mean, there are natural spaces that are flat and mellow and next to creeks, and you still get all the benefits of being outdoors and being in nature, just being on a 1 or 2 mile walk next to a creek on a flat gravel surface. So I guess not be intimidated by the word trail.
Yes, I was just going to say, take the intimidation out of maybe a perception that you have to be remote or really on a distance trail. It's right. Getting outside your door is still being outside.
Right. Absolutely.
Erin, do you have anything you want to add to that?
I would just add that I think, especially as a new trail user or a new camper, in this time, it's really important to learn just how to go to the bathroom outside. I think that is, we're kind of talking about intimidation. That's something that people often get so intimidated by and are afraid to ask, are afraid to kind of approach the subject. And as I mentioned before, we have a ton of resources, videos showing you how to do all of those things. And now's the time to learn, because it's inevitably going to happen when we're out in these areas and things are closed, or maybe we're not comfortable going to public restrooms. So I think that's a great thing to just learn kind of right off the bat.
Absolutely. It is 6 p.m. and that indicates that we need to wrap our session up. I learned a lot. I always do after being here for 25 years. There's never a conversation that I don't take something away. And maybe some of the most important quick tips are how important plan ahead and prepare or know before you go is if you're heading outside. I also believe that masks are here to stay, at least for the next few months. So I would agree with you, Lisa, that we need to get used to wearing them, and that and social distancing, and maybe those are the top takeaways. But really understanding and knowing where you're going and all the different rules and regulations that are in place now particularly for the parks. And if you want to enter into a national park, that really needs to be a requirement before you head out. I want to thank these panelists. This was an excellent conversation, very enjoyable, informative. Lisa, Aaron, Shannon, Roger, and Peter, thank you for taking your time this evening. I want to thank the audience for participating. Again, the number was amazing to have on an evening webinar. And again, it just tells us that the outdoors is a very, very important piece of our lives right now, maybe more than ever. So thank you for participating. Klean Kanteen, once again, a long-term partner of Leave No Trace, helped make this webinar possible. And I'll give one more little plug for our Light Up the Summer campaign. There should be information on your screen. If you want to support that campaign for summer, we would be grateful and appreciative. There it is. And as always, more information can be found on our website, lnt.org, or feel free to reach out to staff and these panelists if you have more questions or more ideas that come up. Thank you all. Have a wonderful evening. Thanks for joining, and good night.
Thanks, Dana.
Thanks.